Welcome to Cultivate, a Veritas Academy podcast, where we explore truth, beauty, and goodness through meaningful conversation. We invite you to join us in discussions meant to edify your mind, encourage your heart, and equip your family to live abundantly in Christ.
Welcome back to Cultivate. I'm really excited to be here today with two of our newer teachers at Veritas, Katie Thompson, a first grade teacher, and Judy Hermanovitch, a third grade teacher. And we're going to be talking about why memorization is the best learning tool for elementary aged kids. So before we get started, Katie and Judy, thank you for being here. Tell us, Katie, how you got started in classical Christian education and what made you pursue and love what you're doing now.
So my background is actually in public education. I went through public education and I taught first as a public educator. And it was interesting to be in that system because it seemed like every 5 years there was a new revolution in education. And it started to feel
the constant revolution?
That's right, the constant revolution. And it started to feel a little bit confusing. So you're selling me on this thing and you're going to say it's the next big, amazing thing. But it only lasts but so long. And I think my husband and I started to wonder if there was a better alternative available for our children. I taught in the Philadelphia public schools as a director of educational.
Lord be with you and keep you.
Yes. I was the director of educational outreach for the Philadelphia Orchestra.
Wow.
And so we would train teaching artists to go into the school district of Philadelphia and do music lessons, music classes for the students there.
Okay.
But what I saw there was that there was constantly a new idea that was supposed to be bigger and better. And every time there was a new idea that was bigger and better, the children suffered. There were setbacks. You know, we would get articles and reports about how reading scores were not what they were supposed to be and math scores were not what they were supposed to be. And it seemed like we needed to find it.
Because you were changing horses in the middle of the stream over and over again.
Exactly.
Did you see some of the same ideas come back again?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
That's so discouraging.
It is very discouraging. And there's a funny quote that goes around public education that if you stay there long enough, you'll see the same new idea 5 times because they just kind of resurface, repackaged in a new way.
That's really hard for kids. I mean, we can, it's kind of funny.
We can laugh here.
We can laugh about it. It's just really not good for the students of Philadelphia.
No, not for students anywhere to have that kind of system that they're being taught under. And so when we had our own children, we knew we wanted something tried and true.
Okay. So, and that's what attracted you to classical Christian
Absolutely.
education. So how about you, Judy?
For me, I grew up in Christian school, and my parents were very diligent in making sure that we had that up through 8th grade. And so, watching my parents.
And where were you?
In Philadelphia.
In Philadelphia.
Born and raised in Philadelphia.
Okay, there we go. So this is like a Philadelphia story. We should have cheesesteaks for this.
Go get some water
episode.
ice.
Yeah.
Water ice, yes, Katie. So my parents were just very good about making sure that we had that biblical training growing up in our education. And my father served in a seminary all through my childhood and early adult years. And my mother worked in schools as a teaching assistant, and my grandfather worked for the school district of Philadelphia. So
you basically come from a Levitical family.
I do. It's really true. Yeah. So it just was kind of natural for me to move into education. And so most of my beginning years of teaching were spent in Christian schools, serving in Christian schools. Like I knew I wanted to honor my parents and the work that they had done in that way. I never felt called to work in public schools. And so Christian education was just the natural thing for me. I kind of fell into classical Christian education thanks to my best friend, Joy, who was serving at a classical school in North Carolina.
Okay.
And she went to a conference and she was like, hey, she's like, I know you're looking for something new. There's a classical school over in Jersey and they're looking for a teacher. And I was like, I don't know anything about classical education. And she was like, no, it's fine. You'll be great. I was like, all right. And the headmaster there took me on, and
was that Sydney?
It was Sydney.
Okay,
yeah,
Sydney
Enriquez. Yeah.
Yeah. Our many years ago 3rd grade teacher here at Veritas.
I know there's a direct link there. So
yeah. So I'm guessing, Katie, that a lot of times when you were getting the new revolutionary idea to fix all other bad ideas, memorization probably wasn't high on the list of things. But here in a classical school, we really use that tool of memorization because our kids, they seem to be like sponges. So how do you see the students just kind of soaking up knowledge in your classrooms, both of you?
Well, I can go first and say I do think that they are like sponges. There's an eagerness that kiddos have, especially in lower grammar school, to just take in as much information as possible. They're enthusiastic. They're unaware of what others are thinking of them. There's no vanity or pride or embarrassment. They're just so ready to do whatever that you ask of them. So songs and chants kind of fit perfectly with that mentality. But
do you get them stuck in your head?
Absolutely. my children, my biological children, get a little bit annoyed with me because I have the songs in my head all the time.
Yeah.
They do. But even just thinking of it from a biological perspective, the hippocampus of a young person is so very pliable. They are just ripe for memorization because it is when there's the most space and the most elasticity within their mind. So they're not just figuratively sponges, they are literally sponges. That's God's design.
Yeah. That's really interesting that people would have a hippo in their brain.
Camping in their brain, hippo camping.
I didn't even know that. I mean, and I'm head of school. So what about you, Judy?
What I see with my students and what I've seen with previous students is that we're giving them this information in a variety of subject areas, and it just prompts further learning on their part. They just want to soak up so much more information than what we're already giving them. And so they're using the time where I see a lot of other kids going and reading things like comic books and things like that, which are all good and fine things to read in a leisurely way. But what I'm finding is my kids are kind of steering away from that, and they're going towards those other books that have more information about these things. They want to dig deeper, and they're using their own time to do that.
And then it ends up with things that seem almost miraculous, where we had our history bee here, and I think that our two winners, I do not like, my name is Ty, but I do not like ties. But we had Katrina Godfrey and Sun Lee Tengbao go through, I think, 49 rounds of questions, and I thought Sun Lee. They said, don't answer the question before we've asked. So he would just lean in toward the mic, like, come on, finish, so I can give the answer because I already know the answer.
Yeah.
And the stuff that they have implanted in their minds is just incredible. So what are some of the ways that you use memorization in your classrooms?
We do catechism questions that are memorized. We do a lot of...
What now just for some of our fans out there, describe what is a catechism? Because not all Christian traditions use catechisms that much.
So a catechism would be a system of questions and answers that help you understand something larger. So here we use the Westminster Shorter Catechism. Our kindergartners start with questions 1 through 16, and they memorize those, and they talk about what they mean and why they mean the things they mean.
Yes, and those things are those answers, which are just basically basic theological answers, are just so helpful to have in your mind. As a dad, I would always go back to, when thinking about in a disciplinary situation with my daughters, what is sin? Sin is any want of conformity unto or transgression of the law of God. So sometimes you might be really angry with your kids, and it's not sinful, right? And sometimes you might think it's funny, but it is sinful. So, and I always like that one on providence, that everybody says, boy, that was providential. And what they mean is like it was good.
Right.
But the Westminster Shorter Catechism says that providence is about what's God's foreordaining whatsoever comes to pass.
The good and the bad.
Yeah, when you lost the game,
it was providence.
That was providence too.
Providence too.
Yeah, we don't say that. Thank the Lord I lost that game. So anything more on memorization or how you use it in your classroom?
Oh, yeah, we use it in so many ways. I mean, Katie already mentioned catechism, but I mean, we use it for Bible and history with chronology. The students are working to memorize the events and scriptural references and the dates and all those little pieces of information. We use it for grammar, for the jingles, parts of speech, helping to identify parts of speech as they go through and classify sentences. They're using it for math. We have a variety of math songs and chants that we use that they're able to pull out as they're going through their problem sets and recall that information.
Yeah, well, of course, this is, I'm just trying to put myself in the place of some of the listeners out there, and they're hearing all of this memorization and stuff like that. So that they probably think that this is just a terribly joyless environment where, teachers go, wah, wah, wah.
Charlie Brown.
Yeah,
Charlie
and that memorization is opposed to joy. Is that what you find in your classroom?
I find the exact opposite. Yes.
Okay. So tell me about, why do kids enjoy memorizing things so much?
I think that the act of memorization gives children confidence. So they're not wondering, do I know this? Do I have this? Can I figure this out? Because they have a surety that they have retained that information in their mind. So it frees their mind to act more confidently. There's nothing like seeing a little first grader who has just gone through 154 Old Testament and New Testament events.
Yeah.
That we do a walk through the Bible, an Old Testament walk through the Bible, then a New Testament walk through the Bible. So it's 77 each. And they go through this in about 7 minutes. And the look of just pure joy on their face is the most precious thing.
Yeah, it's almost rivaling the view of pure joy on the face of grandparents.
Right.
When they hear that same thing.
It's very, very impressive. And they're just so happy. They did it. I know this. And they almost, I don't want to say own in a prideful way, but they kind of own the fact that this knowledge has become theirs and they can count on it being a part of their mind.
Yeah. Well, one of my favorite times of the week is Friday mornings. I usually try to sneak down the hallway so I can listen, and sometimes I just pop into the room. The kindergartners and the first graders are singing their hymns, and by the end of first grade, they have how many? 20 maybe?
More than 20, especially if you include holidays. It's more like 40.
Yeah.
40 songs.
They have 40, and most of them are very meaty, deep, historical.
Theologically sound.
Goodness. Just watching those little kids sing those great truths and so heartily, too.
Oh, my goodness. Yes. It'll move you to tears. Sharon at Mrs. Strawbridge and I are often
So
moved on a Friday morning.
You're passing the Kleenex box back and forth.
Pretty much that happens.
But it's boy, I'd like to just take a bunch of adults at, churches and try to teach them. It'd be so hard to do it with adults.
Yes.
Yeah.
But these kids are going to have that playlist in their heart growing up. That's just, it's
wonderful.
So good.
And if we think about the meaning of joy, the ultimate definition of joy would be fellowship with God. So if that's our true marker of what joy is, what better way to have these little kiddos develop that relationship than to fill their minds with His truth and His word.
Judy, where are some of the areas that you really see joy in the lives of your students as they're doing memory work?
So as the students are reciting a lot of these things, what's interesting is just to watch their faces.
Yeah.
They get excited with their body movements and things like that. And they obviously like to be the ones to pick whichever one we do next when I give them the opportunity to pick. But they just get excited looks on their faces. They just demonstrate that they are so happy to know these things. And what kid does not like to show forth what they know and tell everybody? So
in our culture, sometimes I feel like we're trying to gin up. We're trying to gin up good feelings about self. You know what really helps good feelings about self is actually knowing things.
Yes.
It's actually accomplishing things. That is one of those things where you can go like, yeah, I did it.
I know it.
Well, one of the traditional fun things that we do here is there's a third grade play called Zeus's Family Reunion. And actually, Zeus's Family Reunion was developed initially by my wife, Emily, but really augmented by Sydney Enriquez, whose name's and as the number of the Greek pantheon grew here at Veritas, because we kept having more and more students, so we had to find more and more people to put in this play. And there's one really funny and one really miraculous story of Zeus's Family Reunion. The first year we did it, Mrs. Fisher didn't have a lot of students. She had 10 students, but she was teaching third and fourth grade. And she tried to like take this one young man who, he wasn't really like an actor, but when there's only 10, you kind of have to just jump in there. And she made him Zeus, and Zeus has the biggest number of lines. And he just really struggled to memorize. He was, but then he really buckled down right at the end, and he came in that day of the play and he knew all of his lines except he had memorized the word goddess, and he had substituted in the word goodness. So he said, let me introduce you to Aphrodite, the goodness of love.
That's cute.
And Demeter, the goodness of the field. and I just saw Emily's head just drop. But then a few years later, we had a student. This was still back in a time when there were not very many students, so there weren't understudies or anything like that. And on the day of the play, Hephaestus ended up having a fever, and he was stuck at home. And like the show, like the grandparents and parents are all coming, and we don't have one of the critical characters. And then we had a fifth grader, this was 2 years out from the play, who said, oh yeah, I know all the lines for that character. And they were like, well, you're a girl, you're not. And she said, oh, I know all the lines for every character in that play. So she just stepped in and played Hephaestus. And I was like, that right there is a Zeus's family reunion miracle. So it's amazing how thorough and how deep this memory work can be. Some of those interesting stories that come up when it has to do with memory and how much people remember and things like that. I know you have an interesting story about some of our older students.
Yes. So every year the 10th graders in their rhetoric class read children's books to the first graders, which is just a very charming time. Every now and then their rhetoric teacher is running a little bit late, and so the 10th graders are in the class with me.
Is that Graham?
I wasn't going to name names.
Okay.
I was just going to. So the 10th graders are in the class with me with my first graders, and we have some time to kill. So the first year that it happened, we started singing through some of our first grade songs. History songs that we do are more geography related. They're not the very long grade level ones. And so I had every 10th grader stand next to a first grader, and I said, all right, let's see what you remember. They knew every word to every song. And so they were just big, tall kids standing next to little, precious first graders singing all of these songs that they had not spent any time with in 8 or 9 years.
Isn't that something?
It's amazing.
Yeah,
and they started by saying, I don't think I remember. I don't know if I have it still. And then it just happened.
Isn't that wonderful?
It was great.
Now, I think that it could be easy for people to think about memorization and think back to like Little House on the Prairie, and there's a teacher standing there with a stick back in the good old days
Smack
of
in the
education.
hand,
Yeah. But that's not really what memorizing things is like here at Veritas. How do you as teachers make that really joyful and meaningful and even active in your classes?
So I think we take advantage of the fact that lower grammar school kids tend to be wiggly to begin with. So a lot of our memorization is not seated desk work memorization. We have kids standing, we have them moving. There's a lot of physicality to it. And I think, too...
I used to joke with Sharon Strawbridge that she has the most aerobic position at school.
I think it's an accurate statement.
As the second first grade teacher,
Yes, I think that it's true. But I think because it is so physical and because we have the privilege of being their cheerleaders, it becomes this very fun-filled thing. So these ideas that are supposed to be big, solid concepts become just points in the day that they really look forward to, because to them it feels like a break from the rigor of the academic day. And it's this very just fun and exciting and enthusiastic. I tease my mom because I wanted to be a cheerleader growing up, and she was not in favor of me being a cheerleader.
Oh, really?
She wanted me to be, well, it doesn't matter.
That's a whole nother podcast right there.
But I feel so thankful to God now because I have a job where I come every day, and I'm a cheerleader from 8 a.m. until 3 p.m.
Yes.
It's what I do all day long. And so I think that there's just so much energy and enthusiasm.
That helps me understand the pom-poms.
Shh, don't tell anybody.
Yeah, I mean, we also use a lot of physical movement, but as the kids are also getting a little bit older and are able to like sit a little bit longer than the kiddos that Katie has, we also use a lot of drawings, a lot of coloring things and just little sketches on the sides to help them identify. And it could be something personal to them. It doesn't have to be something class-wide that they're using, but just still using that idea of something that helps them to recall and to use that memorization to help them complete whatever the task is. Those drawings have also proven to be very helpful to them.
And as we memorize things here at Veritas, we often use music and song to do that. So how does that work in your classes?
Well, Katie already mentioned about the littler kids, the kindergartners and first graders that do the singing of the hymns at the end of the week. And, you know, I mean, we see that carry through. I mean, I will find my kids because we can hear them down the hallway. And my kids are just like, as they're working, I mean, they are singing along, you know, and so that musical aspect really does help them. And then also with like the history song in particular, I mean, just those finding that rhythm in the music, again, like just kind of, you can see them thinking through it. Okay, what's the pattern of the music? And they're already kind of thinking ahead. I mean, you can just see it on their faces. Yeah. And it really does give them something else to use to help measure what that information is and to recall it.
Research is really in our favor when it comes to using music because music is a tried and true way of helping to retain information.
Yeah. And it is, I try to make a point to walk the hallways a couple times a day, and one of my favorite things. Not that I'm hearing kids singing, not just down by the music rooms, but all through the school. Now, we start many days with this thing called memory period. Judy, could you tell us a little bit about that, and how does that help students memorize things?
So memory period is when the grammar school classes from second grade up through sixth grade are gathering together, and we're just going through, for the first 10 or 15 minutes of the day, a variety of these things that we memorize. Geography songs, the jingles for grammar, a lot of the history songs from the different classes. It really runs the gamut. We even have some Latin in there that we put in, some Latin chants. By the time the students get to sixth grade, they are pros at all of this. I mean, they have really covered the vast majority of this information. For the second graders and some of the third graders, they are not yet implementing those tools specifically in what they're doing day to day, but they're coming together and they're reciting all these things and they're kind of building one another up. They're encouraging one another when they do this because they're seeing how well they can achieve these things in memorizing them. And what's really funny is that it gets to the point in the year where all of the kids know it so well that by the end of the year, we just have to say, we don't even have to put things up on the projector anymore. Yeah. You know, we just say, let's do that. And the kids are like off and running before we even have it out of our mouths. Yeah. So, you know, they just really have this opportunity just to prove how masterful they are in reciting these things together, and they do it well.
Yeah, so, you know, there's the essay that really kind of kicked off the modern classical Christian schooling movement was Dorothy Sayers' essay, The Lost Tools of Learning. There has been a lot of talk, maybe some of it debate, about whether Sayers' insight about grammar, logic, and rhetoric and basically how they point to kind of a growth schedule for a child, whether that's original to classical education, like that would have been back when the ancients were doing it, or whether it's kind of a newfangled thing in classical education. We don't like newfangled things.
Don't like new things.
It seems like if you go look back, some of it is ahistorical, but it still seems to be right. Katie, when you were back in the public schools, what did they say about learning things by rote and by memory?
Rote was considered a 4-letter word, right? I mean, it is a 4-letter word, but you know what I mean.
Depends on how you spell rote.
Yes, I think that they would have said that rote memorization was the opposite of innovation in education.
Okay.
And I think sometimes we have to be careful because if we think of memorization as the goal, that is bad. If the goal is just to memorize facts, that is not a good thing. But if we look at memorization as a tool towards the ultimate goal of cultivating, loving, and serving and thinking students, then it becomes a very, very helpful thing. You don't want a mechanic who has not memorized car parts. You don't want a doctor who has not memorized the parts of the body. Why would you want a student who has not memorized a tremendous amount of information to help them formulate and articulate arguments and thoughts?
So as parents are trying to help their students in your third grade class, study for tests or something like that. How can parents help their students prepare for tests or quizzes that involve memorization?
Well, we're really going through the majority of these things pretty much every day in class.
Okay.
And so the students learn that as they're going through these things, they're just working to remember these things. They're building that working memory. For the parents
and we're not sending home a lot of homework.
We're not. We're not sending home a lot of homework. And study time, I don't even call it study time. For me, I refer to it more as a review time.
Yeah.
Because study, I think, for a lot of parents is like a scary word. And I think it implies that they need to sit down for like 45 minutes and just drill their kid over and over and over again on these things. And and what I tell the parents is find a system that works for you. Everybody's home life is different. I can't speak to that individually, obviously, but find a system that works with you in your home schedule where you are taking something, whether it's Bible chronology or history chronology or the math songs or the grammar jingles, which I always give to my parents because I want them to have an understanding of what we're doing in class.
And they can write you better emails.
They can write me better. Yes, their grammar is exceptional.
Yeah.
And then I send them back and label the parts of speech. So I just encourage them to find a way to work into their schedule where they're just finding 5 or 10 minutes. That's really all it takes once you get into that practice.
Yeah.
Just 5 or 10 minutes, couple nights a week to go through these things. And the kids because they are sponges, they're just absorbing it already naturally.
Yeah.
That they don't need to put in long study sessions.
Well, and that points back to an idea I've been doing some reading on recently. And it's how sometimes our culture, and maybe especially educational things in American culture, subtly convince kids that they're not competent to do work. And, here at Veritas, it's not, and I'm not saying that kids don't struggle with different things. Everybody struggles with things. But the thing I want to make sure that we're communicating to these students is that generally you can do it. And if you need a little help, that's fine. But we want to help you be able to do things on your own.
Yeah.
And I never thought that would be kind of a radical idea, but it seems that education has become a lot more therapeutic than accomplishment-oriented, which is not great for a society in the long run.
Right.
So what would you say to parents who might be listening and thinking, this memory stuff sounds like a good idea, but the school that my kids attend they're not using it. They're not emphasizing memory. So what would you say to parents like that?
I guess I would say I think that whether or not they're emphasizing memorization or not at their school, all of our kids' minds are being filled with something, right? They're being filled with sports scores or
mainly Taylor Swift.
Taylor Swift songs, right?
And I have 4 daughters who are in their 20s and teens, and I don't know anything. They're like, Dad, you just fail at Elise, my junior, gave me a quiz of 20 pop culture people, and Taylor Swift was the only one that I knew because she dates Travis Kelce, and I watched the Chiefs play football.
There you go.
So
I think that's her connection to a lot of people right
yes,
now.
it is. Yes, it is. But again, back to the question.
So I think just in general, our children's minds are made to absorb information. So whether or not you are going to buy into the idea of memorization being a positive thing in education, your children are memorizing tremendous amounts.
Yes.
So it might be worth taking the time to sit back and assess what are they actually retaining? And if you find that the answer to that is that they're not filling their minds with the things that point them to the good and the beautiful and the true, it might be worth considering something different.
Yeah.
I almost find it almost laughable when parents kind of have that response to memorization, because in virtually anything that you do as an adult, you're employing memorization.
Yes.
Whether it's, familiarity with a computer program that you use at work, Katie mentioned mechanics and tools and how they work. I mean, you're using memorization and you see the benefit of that in your job. Why would you not want that for your child in their job as a student?
So just another example of memorization kind of coming back in real life experience. I have 2 boys. They're 10 years apart, and the older one sometimes tries to antagonize the younger one. So they are wrestling around and tickling and fighting, and my little guy gets a little bit upset, and I hear him yell across the house, "Gabe, I abhor what you are doing." And I was like, "Abhor, buddy, where did you get abhor?" He said, "Mrs. Lake told me to abhor what is evil and cling to what is good. It's Romans 12:9, and Gabe is not doing it." And I just remember thanking God for Mrs. Lake, that she had taught my son this big word, helped him understand what it was, and he had stored up and kept it to use at an applicable time.
And I think about the history of God's people. There's so many times when the scripture says about God's word, not just to hide it in your heart, but talk about it when you're standing up, when you're sitting down, when you're walking along the way. We live in a time where not only do we're in my office here surrounded by books, and not only do we have books, but now we have text. I can know everything that doesn't matter at all the time on my iPhone. But we have text. We're flooded with it. In so many parts of human history, people haven't had that. Yeah. That's perhaps one of the reasons why God made us to be able to remember things. Like I always tell my kids during disciplinary situations, they would say, "I forgot." And I would say, "Well, God killed all the Israelites because they forgot."
Wow.
What am I supposed to do?
That's a little extreme.
Yeah, but it's interesting in the Psalms you hear that refrain that, or in the prophets. I was reading in Jeremiah this morning. They've forgotten me. So that memorization, that repetition. You think about the Passover meal, and it starts with that question, why is this night different than every other night? And we do those things over and over again because God wants us to simmer in them. He wants us to soak in them. And, that's why the stuff that we learn, the stuff that we memorize here at Veritas is just so precious because it will help them to not end their sentences with prepositions or something like that. But more than that, it will be in those challenging times when they remember that answer about God's providence, or when they can take solace in a hymn that speaks to very deep things, or when someone tries to tell them that history, we have a lot of people that play with words in history now, and hopefully our kids can have that memory of the way things actually happen. So before we sign off, I wanted to thank our season sponsor, Hershey Financial Advisors. They're a wealth management firm located at North Point Boulevard in Lancaster, PA, leading people to make better financial decisions and empowering them to fulfill a vision beyond themselves. Ladies, thank you so much for being on this episode, and thank you for the work that you do. I really think of our grammar school teachers as people that are investing so much in those young kids in ways that you can't, it's very hard to even understand how much that can reverberate into the future. Every year we come to graduation and we see kids that have gone all the way through our school. We even have some pictures out on the windows here of some kindergarten pictures.
Lifers.
Yeah.
Lifers.
Kindergarten pictures, and then the same people standing in a row in their graduation gowns. That work that their grammar school teachers did with them is just something that's carrying them to places that we're all excited to see. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You've been listening to Cultivate, the podcast of Veritas Academy, a preschool through 12th grade classical Christian school in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania. If you'd like to learn more about Veritas, visit veritasacademy.com to discover the truth, beauty, and goodness of classical Christian education.